Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program. My name is Brian Cofrancesco, and I am a member of the Meriden Historical Society's Board of Directors. On behalf of the entire board, I welcome you all to our first virtual program. Before we begin the program, a few pieces of information. All attendees joining us on Zoom are on mute, and we ask you to please keep your cameras off to ensure an uninterrupted presentation. To turn your camera off, click the Stop Video button in the bottom left corner of your screen. After watching the video history of Hubbard Park, we will have a live Q&A session. Please submit your questions in the chat. You will find the chat icon in the Zoom toolbar on the bottom of your screen. For those watching live on Facebook, you can submit questions too. Leave your questions in the comments section of the live stream. We will do our best to ask as many questions as possible. And now, to get us started, it is my honor to introduce Sherwin Borsuk, President of the Meriden Historical Society.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sherwin Borsuk. I am the current president of the Meriden Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to what we hope will be the first of many future online programs. The Meriden Historical Society was founded in 1892. Then, as today, we considered our mission to preserve Meriden's history for future generations. We host programs with the Meriden Public Library and exhibits at the Andrews Homestead on West Main Street. The following program will be our first attempt at hosting a virtual presentation on the internet, and we hope you enjoy it. Our research center in South Meriden is open to the public, to anyone desiring to research the history of their Meriden home or family, or to learn more about any facet of Meriden's history. At the moment, because of the pandemic, we are open by appointment only and use necessary procedures to keep our visitors and our workers safe. We maintain a website, meridenhistoricalsociety.org, with information on Meriden's history and contact information to reach us with any question. Please visit our site and consider joining the Society as a member. We rely on donations of items from Meriden's rich history, as well as financial donations to fund our activities. Our website has a PayPal link for joining the Society or making a donation to support our work and our programs, both physical and virtual, such as the one you are about to see. I'd like to thank the Parks and Recreation Department of the City of Meriden for co-sponsoring the following program, in particular, Chris Borden and Kathy Matula. Also, special thanks to David Cooley for helping produce the video about Hubbard Park and its history that will be shown. Kathy Matula from Meriden Parks and Recreation would like to say a few words and introduce our speaker for tonight.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is very exciting for us. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on our video today. So about 2.5, almost 3 weeks ago, our director of Parks and Rec, Chris Borden, came to us and said, the 120th anniversary is coming up. So today is the actual 120th anniversary. So all of us, me, you, everybody here, we're part of history right now. This is the 120th anniversary of the dedication of Castle Craig and Hubbard Park. So Chris came to us and said, you know, we need to have an event. But with all the COVID and everything going on, of course, in my head thinking huge event, but we had to downscale it. So I reached out to Justin Piccirillo. We sat down and brainstormed, and we came up with a safe way to get everyone involved and have a really great interactive video. And that's what we're going to show you today. So Justin and I, and with our friend Dave Cooley, our producer, trust me, it was a little bit difficult. Justin is, as everybody knows, Justin's a teacher, so he's had his own challenges. We just had our Halloween event, which every single day things were changing. Can we have it? Can we not have it? Where are we going to have it? What are the protocols? So in between all of that, we were videotaping at Hubbard Park. We did have a couple of little weather issues. We'll see, you'll hear some wind in a little bit of the video, but that's okay because that is raw and natural Hubbard Park. Is just the beauty of Hubbard Park. It's a park that's ever changing. So I've been here working in Meriden for 5 years. And two of the things that are important to me in everything I do, and every event we do, and every time we reach out to anybody, is community and collaboration. And I feel like this collaboration with the Meriden Historical Society encompasses both community and collaboration. As Sherwin said, Meriden has such a rich history. It's so amazing. And the Historical Society, you know, all of you that live in Meriden, having the Historical Society at your fingertips, what a gift. I'm in awe every time I meet with anyone from the Historical Society. The information that they have, that they grasp, it's just awe-inspiring. I've been humbled to be part of this project. I'm so thankful that I was able to help and participate. And hopefully all of you will get something out of this. At the end of the presentation, you will be able to ask questions to Justin. If there's anything that we haven't addressed, maybe there'll be a little podcast going on after this. I'll have to talk to Justin. But like I said, collaboration is also important. And the fact that we were able to collaborate together has been such an inspiration. And I'm just happy to be able to be part of it. So thank you very much for everybody being here. And we are going to present to you Castle Craig, the Tower, 120 Years of Love and Legends. Thank you so much for participating. Turn it up, eat your popcorn, enjoy the movie.
Don't you wish you could go back in time just for like a couple hours or just a day?
I feel like I kind of am. Look the way I'm dressed.
You look very dashing. Welcome to Hubbard Park. We're at the beautiful Castle Craig. I'm Kathy Matula. I'm the recreation coordinator for the fabulous city of Meriden, and I'm here with Justin Piccirillo today. He is our city historian, and today marks an anniversary.
It does.
Tell us about it.
Here we are atop of East Peak, Castle Craig right behind us. 120 years ago today, Walter Hubbard and 250 others celebrated the donation of the park to the city of Meriden.
And they did it with a huge clam bake.
They did. A clam bake and a oyster bake, 6 bushels of oysters.
That seems like a lot of oysters.
It is. It is.
That sounds like a great party.
It does.
Now we'll show you a picture from that party, and we're sitting in the exact spot.
Yeah, we are. We are. With the castle right behind us. To understand the park, one must first look at its donor. Walter Hubbard, Meriden's greatest single benefactor, was born in Middletown, Connecticut on September 23, 1828. Like many youth of his day, he grew up on a farm and was educated in the township schools. At the age of 18, he secured a position as a clerk in a general store where, by his thrift, energy, and strict attention to his employer's interests, he accumulated enough capital to embark into business for himself. This he did, and in 1851, Hubbard opened a small dry goods and clothing store in Meriden, in which he conducted until 1860. Hubbard was married in 1852 to Abby Ann Bradley, the daughter of Levi Bradley, a prominent farmer of neighboring Cheshire. She died within a few months, and Hubbard never remarried. In 1854, in company with his brother-in-law, Nathaniel L. Bradley, Hubbard founded the Bradley and Hubbard Manufacturing Company. The firm would become one of the largest manufacturers of lamps in the world. This enterprise was the financial vehicle that allowed Hubbard to purchase land surrounding Meriden's Hanging Hills. From his first acquisition in 1869 and throughout the next 30 plus years, he added land to a park which would later bear his name. And this park he would dedicate to the city upon this afternoon all those years ago.
We have visitors from all over the world here at Castle Craig, from April all the way until the end of October every year. Justin,
Yeah.
tell me an interesting factoid that not many people know about the castle.
Well, I don't think many people know that Walter Hubbard's initials are carved into the keystone of the castle.
What's the date say?
1900, and that's what we're celebrating.
Oh, awesome. Thanks for that interesting tidbit.
During the October 29th, 1900 dedication of Hubbard Park, a large flag was raised at noon high above the tower by Hubbard's contractor, Patrick Quigley. As it flown in the breeze, 3 rousing cheers were given. This flag would also have historic associations. It was shot down during the War of the Rebellion, and years later, it was raised over the Hawaiian capital of Honolulu. When the Republic of Hawaii was proclaimed during President Cleveland's administration, there was an unsuccessful attempt to haul this flag down by the rebellious subjects of their queen. It is unknown how this flag would later come into the possession of Walter Hubbard or of the city of Meriden. Walter Hubbard formally dedicated the tower and presented it to the city of Meriden October 29, 1900. This was the provided account of the day's dedication festivities in a local newspaper. A large number of members of the Court of Common Council, together with other dignitaries, attended an oyster roast in the shadow of the tower. Westbound trolleys were crowded with citizens who used this form of transportation to the park area, from which they had a long and arduous trek on foot to the tower. There were also a number of citizens who drove to the top of the mountain in their own carriages. At 2 p.m., it was estimated that approximately 250 guests were in attendance. Their generous host, Walter Hubbard, had provided 6 barrels of oysters and a barrel of clams. These were roasted over a big fire under the direction of C.W.F. Pardee of the Winthrop Hotel and P.J. Quigley, a local contractor, with the assistance of 12 men. The tower itself was the center of attraction, and nearly everyone had something to say concerning the beautiful scenery and Mr. Hubbard's benevolence.
I think it's very magical up here.
I think so too.
Whenever I'm up here, everyone that comes up here forgets about all the stress and troubles of the city. People come up here to reminisce. They tell us about their first kiss, their first date. I've witnessed several weddings. It's just beautiful up here.
Absolutely.
And very peaceful.
Right. So they started building the castle in April of 1900. And it came from a visit into Scotland that Walter Hubbard had traveled to. When they got to Scotland, they came to a little village called Craigellachie. And to get over into the village, they had to cross this bridge. And this bridge actually had 2 towers on either side. And when Walter Hubbard started acquiring all the land, he had come back from this trip, and he had it in his mind that he was going to create this park. And we seem to believe that atop of the peak, he wanted to take that castle that he had seen in Craigellachie, and that's where we get the name Castle Craig from.
So the idea for the castle came from a bridge.
Yeah.
Today, we do yoga classes up here.
Mm-hmm.
We have a full moon viewing, and that's pretty spectacular. I could imagine back then when they came up here in the horse and buggy to look at the full moon, that must have been amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely no light pollution.
We also have the race, the Bernie Jarrell race.
That's right.
Coming up here, all the way up here, 3 miles up and 3 miles down.
That's right.
And then of course we have guided hikes every week. So it's still utilized.
Absolutely.
Every single day.
Absolutely.
All year
Absolutely.
round. I hope that he appreciates that we still keep his vision alive.
I hope so too.
So I had read before that his wife passed away shortly after they were married.
Yeah.
Now, do you think, and to me, it's a sad love story, and he spent the rest of his life with a broken heart and building this beautiful park for all of us.
Yeah.
Do you think that if she hadn't passed away, we would still have the park that we have today?
I don't know. That's so hard to say. I mean, this is definitely all speculation and opinion. But I think seeing how he treated kids in the youth of his day, I think he would have had kids. I think he would have been a big part of their lives. And I don't know if the park would have been such a focal point in his life if he had kids and he had his wife.
So out of such a tragedy came such an amazing, beautiful venture.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, she died a day before her 20th birthday. And for the next 60 or so years, he just put everything he had into his business, everything he had into this park, acquiring the land. And I think he'd be very proud of what it's become.
And I'm happy to be part of it.
Me too.
And I'm happy to have you here.
Absolutely.
And
This is
always
great.
giving us such great information.
This is wonderful.
A nature lover all his life, Walter Hubbard often drove his carriage along the shores of Meriden Reservoir, looking up at the majestic beauty of the hanging hills. It was in the early 1880s, as he continued to acquire land, that Hubbard devised a plan for building a park. Hubbard is pictured here riding along a cliff drive. The pathway known today as Fairview Drive. The name Hubbard Park was officially established on March 7th, 1898, by an act presented by City Alderman Henry T. King. This was confirmed on January 9th, 1899, by the Connecticut General Assembly after the state formalized the city's ownership of the park. Now, there's some debate about Olmsted, who designed Central Park. Was he a contributing factor in designing Hubbard Park?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Walter Hubbard had asked and reached out to the Olmsteds in Brookline, Massachusetts. He reached out to Frederick Law Olmsted for an opinion. He wanted him to come to the park and to witness what Hubbard had started. Well, Frederick Law Olmsted was almost 80 years old when this came, when Walter Hubbard wanted him. By no means was Frederick Law Olmsted coming to Meriden. So he gave it to his son, John Charles, actually his stepson. John Charles came here in 1898, and he looked around, they went for a walk around the entire park, and he offered several opinions over 7 letters which came to Walter Hubbard. From a historical point of view, Walter Hubbard never responded. Not that we know of, that he never responded to these 7 letters. And these letters were quite critical of Walter Hubbard's designs. There are a few suggestions that Olmsted requested, that he put forth, and Walter Hubbard did act on a couple of them. But to say that it was an Olmsted designed park, or even a dually designed park, I'd question that, because I think Walter Hubbard was, first of all, he was the say, he was the final say, but I think for the most part, a lot of the designing of the park really came from Walter Hubbard, and like I said, only a few suggestions from Olmsted.
Obviously, this is one of the prime hiking spots in Connecticut. I think hikers get confused with the peaks. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So we are on East Peak. If you just go on the other side of this mountain, you're going to come to West Peak. Across, we have South Mountain, but it wasn't always labeled that. As early as we can go back, the place names have always changed. In fact, everything here has changed a couple times over. Mirror Lake, the lake that's down below, was considered the old reservoir. But here we are on East Peak. Originally, this was thought of along with the West Peak, they were both considered West Peak.
We actually have new trail boards coming, and we'll have enlarged pictures of the trail maps from the Meriden Land Trust in there.
Really?
I hiked for the first time West Peak this year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And there were remnants of buildings.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Sure. So as early as the 1850s, there was some type of settlement on West Peak. In an 1853 newspaper, we hear of a gentleman from South Meriden who made his way here. He had purchased some land atop of West Peak, and he had plans of building a hotel.
I could have been the recreation coordinator for a huge hotel in Hubbard Park.
It could have been. It could. So it was called the West Peak Hotel. When Henry Johnson, who owned the land here, had gotten wind that, hey, we can actually make some settlements here, he actually had plans drawn up for an even greater hotel. It never came to fruition, but once word had gotten out that a hotel may come to fruition here, a lot of the affluent people of Meriden started buying houses atop of West Peak, and those are the remnants that you are seeing of their houses.
Oh, that's very interesting. Do we know why the hotel never ended up getting built? I can't imagine it would be easy to haul water up there.
Well, I think it's Walter Hubbard. Walter Hubbard, he got wind of this, and he did not want anything to disrupt the land, to disrupt the water. So he put a stop to it as quick as he could by purchasing the surrounding land, and more importantly, just building up the park.
So Walter Hubbard's vision is the purest form of a park.
I believe so. I think he would be very proud of what it's become. And just knowing that it's still being used under the parameters that he left the park. And I think that's a very important thing to be recognized today. He told Quigley, who was his supervisor, he said, that stone, I want the kids to remember. I want to make something about this rock that kids will remember. And this is called Face Rock, and it's actually right here. And he actually took 2 marbles. Originally there were 2 marbles inside this guy's face. They're long gone now, but as you can see right here, Face Rock.
I happened to take a sneak peek at some historical pictures of Van Shell from someone's book that's coming out pretty soon. And it was really cool how they had all those benches set up for families to come and sit together.
Yeah, you know, like going back to the Grecian temple, which is behind it, in 1907, that was opened up for the Meriden City Band. The Meriden City Band was the precursor to the Meriden Symphony. And the Meriden City Band would play here every Sunday, or just about every Sunday. And then once the band shell came in the early 50s, that's when the Meriden Symphony actually took over, and that's where they played there. But more than anything, I think any person in Meriden has a story about this park, and it's all good.
The historic photos here in this presentation are just a small part of the upcoming book, Images of America, Hubbard Park, by Justin Piccirillo, scheduled to be released by Arcadia Publishing in February 2021. Do keep an eye out for it.
Look how beautiful. So amazing here and magical.
I found laughter in the springtime with the daffodils on parade, and I found love under summer fireworks while the symphony orchestra played, and I saw heaven in the autumn hues from the top of Castle Craig. And the snowy winter lights, what a wonderful display. Hey. This city's made of silver, this city's made of gold, and I so many different places, but Meriden is my home. In the places I know so well, and I understand all the stories that they tell, for I've done all those things.
Castle Craig is the perfect hiking spot. You can come up the...
And they ask me.
Okay.
That's right. Just start the hiking thing again. Don't worry.
What?
Just start the hiking piece again and I'll let it in. Whenever you're ready.
We get hikers from all over. What was I going to say? We get hikers from...
There are hikers at Hubbard?
They do! That's cool that we're sitting in the first structure in the park. It's so amazing and so historic and
I cut it. I thought you got it.
you gotta give us the signal.
That was good. That was good.
Well, there was a big pause.
That was a keeper. We're done.
But Meriden is my home. This city's made of silver. This city's made of gold. And I've been so many different places, but Meriden is my home. Oh, Meriden is my
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Brian Cofrancesco, and I am a member of the Meriden Historical Society's Board of Directors. And that was a pretty great video, wasn't it? I'm so glad you were all able to join us to see it. There's so much to love about Hubbard Park, and we're about to learn a lot more about it. So it is my privilege to facilitate tonight's question and answer session with our presenter and my friend, Justin Piccirillo. If you don't know him, Justin has spent his career in art education as an artist, a political cartoonist, a musician, a genealogist, and as a historian. And he's also a new member of the Historical Society Board of Directors. Justin lives in Meriden with his wife and his 3 sons. And as you heard in the video, he is the author of Hubbard Park, a new book that will be released from Arcadia Publishing in February 2021. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. So I have a few questions that I'll ask to get us started, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So for those of you who are joining us tonight, please send in a question in the Zoom chat. And if you're watching us on Facebook, you can post in the comments section. We've already received a bunch of questions, and I'm sure there will be more. So I will do my best to ask as many as possible this evening.
Sounds great.
So Justin, to get started, can you tell us a little bit about how your research into Hubbard Park began?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I also I'm a teacher by day. I moonlight with the Record Journal. I do the cartooning for the Record Journal. And about 10 years ago, I actually proposed a cartoon called Silver City Citizens, and I enjoyed it. Hubbard was actually my first one. I proposed it. I don't know if it really flew that well, but I really enjoyed doing it. I made a mock-up of Walter Hubbard, and it kind of just sat there on my desk for a while until I said, we got to make this into a book. And as you know, so Brian's the author of this book. So I reached out to Brian. Brian helped me out. So Brian wrote the children's part of it, the children's, so it's a children's book. He wrote the words, I did the pictures, but here's where it got interesting. We worked on it, and then I wanted to get a publisher for it right away. So I reached out to a bunch of publishers. There were 5 of them I think I reached out to. And then, you know, the first one, I'm sorry, we don't want a children's book about who's this guy Hubbard, you know, and rightfully so. I mean, it was, you know, a publisher out in the Midwest, I think the first one was. Well, any which way, when we got to the 5th one, he says, you know, I don't really want your book. And I was like, what? And he said, he goes, but you have such a passion for the park. I want you to write this book. And so that's pretty much how it started. And here we are.
Long journey to get there, isn't it? So I know this is a really big question, but how has Hubbard Park evolved? It's been 120 years since the dedication. I'm sure there's been a lot of changes.
Yeah. Well, although it's still pretty much the way he left it. I mean, it doubled in size. I mean, that's one thing. But it was about 800 acres when he dedicated it. By the time he died in 1911, it had gone up to about 1,200 acres. He still amassed. Here we are today, over 1,800 acres. But I think probably one of the biggest things that Hubbard didn't see the park like we see it today. There was 5 acres right in the middle that was adjacent to Mirror Lake that the woman who owned this property, she wouldn't give it up. And he tried for almost 30 years. Her name was Mary Connerton. And even right up into his death, I mean, he tried getting this land. So the park that we see today is not the park from 120 years ago. A little different. So if you're at the band shell and you're looking out, and when you get to Notch Road, which is the road just right adjacent to it, all that land was actually the Connerton land. And there was a big line of trees that actually separated the park from her land. And like I said, it was about 5 acres.
Well, I'm actually going to jump to an audience question because it fits in really nicely here. Is there a listing of who Mr. Hubbard purchased the land from?
There is. It's in the city engineering office. Actually, I'm looking at it. It's right there on my wall. Yeah, so if you go back to 1869, and that was the precursor to the actual reservoir. So the reservoir actually became our city reservoir in 1873. So we're talking only a few years beforehand, and he started purchasing the land. His first acquisition was actually right around the bend where we know today, the bend going up towards the castle. So that was his first acquisition in 1869.
Wonderful, thank you. What was the most surprising thing you learned through your research into Hubbard Park?
Oh, geez. Well, the Connerton house, you know, so if you go like on Google, and you can see a bunch of different postcards. There's one postcard that it just eluded me. This one postcard, I always saw these 2 houses, and I had to know where these houses stood, why they stood there. You know, we don't see them today. And that was in fact the Connerton house and the barn that was next door. That surprised me because, you know, Hubbard never saw the park we saw, like I just mentioned. Probably the other thing that really surprised me throughout all the research is that that West Peak was the park was occupied well before it was Hubbard Park. I mean, there was ice harvesting in Mirror Lake. There was a settlement on top of West Peak. So there were people going about their daily life in that park before it was a park. In fact, they say that Johnson from Johnson Avenue, Henry Johnson's farm was where the halfway house is today. So, I mean, I can't imagine, with such rocky soil, I can't imagine the crops they had there, but they did say that in fact was one of his farms.
So that leads into a really good question that's come in from the audience, is if you could tell us about the pavilion, the Fairview Pavilion, or the halfway house that's halfway up the mountain.
Yeah, so that was the second structure that was built on the premises. The first one was, I think we mentioned it in the video, it's called the Hubbard Park Grecian Temple. That's the pavilion down below behind the band shell. That was the first structure. And then, so the second one was built in 1899. That's the Fairview Observatory. So they call it this observatory because there were these two massive telescopes that were actually mounted looking out towards Meriden. And they said on a clear day, you can actually make out the town hall clock, which, I mean, that's pretty cool.
So we're starting, there are a lot of questions coming in, but there's a couple that are all having to do with Castle Craig. So I just want to switch, kind of going way up the mountain now. Who actually designed Castle Craig Tower? Was it Walter Hubbard?
Oh, well, again, in the video, we talked about Craig Alessi. So I guess we have to take a step back before we actually address that. So Walter Hubbard, as it was said, he had the third biggest lamp maker in the world. He was the company in the world. He was getting burnt out. By 1880, he was really burnt out of the business. He was president of the business, so he was he took some time off. The first thing he did was he built a hotel on Colony Street called the Winthrop Hotel. After that, Clarence Bradley, which we know eventually donated the money to the Bradley home, he and his nephew Clarence Bradley went around the world. They took a train to San Francisco, hopped on a boat, went through Asia, and then they went up and down throughout Europe. When they were there, they ended up coming to Scotland, the Craig Alessi Bridge. And as you saw in the picture, the Craig Alessi Bridge had two towers on either side. Hubbard remembered that. So when he came back here with this idea for a park, he hired a 19-year-old draftsman from Bradley and Hubbard, his company, named David Douglas. Now there was a little controversy about this name. So David Douglas was originally Stuart David Douglas, and it didn't come to light that his real name until afterward. So after his father was a David Douglas as well. And he always went by Stuart David Douglas, but when his father died, he just assumed the David Douglas. And so he asked him to draw the castle and design it.
And do you know where the rocks came from that were used to build the castle?
Oh, they're right from the vicinity. They're all the trap rock right from the mountain.
Can you talk a little bit about the construction of the castle and how they managed to build such a large building right on the edge of a cliff?
Oh, that's a great question. So like I said, it was built in April of 1900. The foreman was a gentleman named Levi Moses. And it's interesting with this guy, Levi Moses, he was a very, very, he worked H. Wales lines. He worked for them as well. And what he did was he accumulated this group of guys, and it was really, really cool. Led by Quigley, who was Hubbard's right-hand man, Moses, a gentleman named Morrissey, who ended up becoming our second park superintendent. These gentlemen all came together. They built it. It was finished in the fall of 1900, and then the dedication in October.
So a time-specific question. During World War II, would they have used the tower as a lookout tower with air raids and Meriden's air raid warden unit?
Right. Say that one more time.
Sure. During World War II, would they have used Castle Craig Tower as a lookout with Meriden's air raid warden unit?
It was used as a lookout. I'm not quite sure exactly any specifics on that, but I had read that, yeah, it was used as a lookout tower.
Another big question, and I know you're going to struggle with answering this one, but
Oh, geez.
is there a most memorable, or maybe memorable, many memorable events that have taken place at the castle? Any that stand out above the rest?
At the castle?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you know what? There was a solar eclipse. No, listen to this one. This is a cool one. So in 1926, there was I believe 26, sometime in the 20s, there was this really cool solar eclipse, and it was a really big deal. And so they actually had all these guys come up to the top of the castle, and that was a big turning point because number one, it was the changing in the guard, I guess you can say, because it went from Morrissey, who was the superintendent, and it was going to the third superintendent, who was the guy Frank St. George. And right in the middle there, Morrissey. You know what? Let me backtrack also. When you know me, I just got to keep talking. So listen to this one. So it seems like, from Hubbard to Quigley, all the way up to Mr. Borden today, every one of these parks, the superintendents or directors, each one of these guys really brought something special to the park. And that is very, very, very true. Frank St. George came in between the middle to towards the end of the 20s, right around this period. And he really was about design. He really changed things, changed it up a little bit. And it was more about the aesthetics of the park. And that was really, really important. So I think that solar eclipse, bringing people in the park, it was really just setting the table for celebrations that would pretty much carry on for the rest of the century. You know me, I keep talking,
Thought you might enjoy that question. Let's see. So going back down to the lower level, you talked a little bit about the Grecian temple. Can you talk a little bit about it, as well as about the cannon that used to be beside it and what happened to it?
All right, so in 1898, the Grand Army of the Republic, so these are the veterans of the Civil War, they had planned to take this Civil War mortar, this cannon, and they wanted to bring it to Walnut Grove Cemetery. Well, unfortunately, the public didn't want it at the cemetery. So they actually protested quite vehemently. And they were actually really upset that it would go there and not at the park. So the Grand Army, Walter Hubbard, had a discussion, and they said, hey, can we put it in the park? And the deal was that Hubbard had to pay for it to get there. Now here's the fun part. It was in the middle of winter, and it was in the middle of a nasty, nasty ice storm. So if you could imagine a 17,000-pound cannon being lugged from the train station all the way up West Main Street. Now remember, right at the base where Hubbard Park Pizza is, you got to remember right there is it was a bridge. All right, so here you got this wooden bridge, and they were really, really, really scared that this cannon was just going to break through this bridge and just fall flat right into the water there. It didn't, but I do remember that Stiles, that was his name, the guy that was in charge of bringing the mortar there. Something happened. I think he broke his foot for some reason. I'm not quite sure. I think just trying to pull the thing over the ice. But so the mortar ended up becoming on top of Cannon Hill. So we're at the band shell. If you just slide over just a little bit, you got the flagpole there, and the mortar was right there, overlooking, aimed towards, I guess, towards the lower West Main Street.
And one thing I've always found interesting, and I believe it's one of the featured pictures, maybe the cover of your book, is the view of that turnaround that was right beside the mortar. Can you talk a little bit about how that area has changed in its design over the last 120 years?
Oh yeah, so this was, I think you and I had this conversation before too, was, the idea of Olmsted. Olmsted, there's this kind of, the controversy, did he or didn't he, how much didn't he work with the park? There was, our city surveyor was a gentleman named Clark, and he was brought in to survey the land and to see where the entrance to the park should actually physically be. And when he came in, he designed pretty much the whole entrance to the park. So if you're on West Main Street and you're coming up towards Southington, your first right, all right? Back then it was called Parkway. Today we call it Hubbard Parkway. Some people call it Hubbard Park Drive. That whole entrance right there was designed by a gentleman named Clark.
So staying in that area of the park a little bit, we've had a couple of questions about the history of the band shell. Can you talk about how that came to be and a little bit about how that was designed and constructed?
Yeah, so in the early 1950s, Mr. Barry. So now we're talking about James Barry. He was the park superintendent for a very good long time. And in fact, you know, his son and his daughter are his daughter's still alive. His son just passed away, and I had a pleasure of really spending a lot of time with him talking about the park. And one of the things was, so the natural incline of the actual hill going into the band shell. So the original intent in 1907 was to have an area, a public performance area. And that's where the pavilion really came to be, the Grecian temple. The natural incline of the land just arcs that way. So they just felt if we can build a bandstand, we can actually fit more people. And I think the original intent was an 80-person bandstand, and that was a big deal because that's when the symphony was really working really prominent. And so they wanted to be able to fit the entire symphony inside this band shell and still utilize the actual incline of the field.
So kind of building off of that question, somebody said they had always heard that their grandfather helped build not only the band shell, but also the goldfish pond. So could you talk a little bit about, if you know, the people who built either of those structures, and then in particular, the history of the goldfish pond?
You know, there's a lot of talk, and I don't know the exact answer to this. That's a really, really good question. When the WPA came in right after the Depression, there was a lot of talk of them building up the goldfish pond, Mirror Lake, working on the drive right up to the castle. There's a lot of speculation that the WPA craftsmen came in and worked on these. As far as the band shell, that was a bunch of park workers that really dedicated a long time to get that thing up and running. I know it was designed probably about, I think it was like 2 years before it was actually completed. I think 54 to 56 it was that it took.
So one question is, I just have to ask this one. This one comes in from Hector, and Hector asks, Mr. Piccirillo, do I get extra credit on my project for watching this?
Oh, geez, Hector, of course you do.
I think that was the right answer.
Hey,
So,
can I interrupt for a second? All right, so I'm going to tell you a story about Hector. All right. So I don't know. So right now at Lincoln, I teach at Lincoln. So right now we're doing Meriden projects. We're actually doing Meriden architecture, Meriden people, Meriden portraits. And Hector chose to do the top of the Civil War monument at City Hall. Really, really, really cool. So Hector, yeah, extra credit, buddy. There you go.
Great choice, Hector. Awesome choice to draw. So there are a lot of questions about things that have changed in Hubbard Park over the years. So I want to start kind of with a lot of questions about 691. So can you talk a little bit about 691's construction and if any of the park's land was taken for the construction of 691?
46 acres. 46 acres. You know, so in the late 50s, there was talk. I mean, this is 10 years before it actually happened. I think there was an article in 57 or 58 in the Meriden Record that proposed that there may be something coming down the line. All right, as early as let's say that was about 57, and then they jumped to about 60, 62. Again, the public just did not want it, just did not want it. Now, I know there's politics involved here, so I don't really know how much I can say and how much I can't say, but I will say that the city appealed it, reappealed it, and there was a very, very controversial story that was published called The Rape of Hubbard Park. And that threw the public into a real big tizzy. And I think that was a big turning point for 691. Unfortunately, we lost 46, divided the park in half. I mean, it really was just, if Walter Hubbard was alive, it would never have happened. I don't think so. Walter Hubbard this was his baby. And, for it to come to a point where it divided a park in half, it also stayed in the courts over a decade. I mean, they couldn't come to a decision. And when they finally did, they repaid Meriden, and they gave 46 acres from the top, from the peak, that was owned by the state.
Well, and building off of that, and as far as the boundaries of the park go, question just came in. Why does the Meriden boundary exclude a portion of the park? And is there or has there been any plan to have Meriden buy it, or is it state land?
On the peak, there is still state land up there. I believe so. I mean, I might be a little wrong there, but I don't think so. There's still more towards Southington, more towards the Berlin side. But a lot of the land that was state owned was given back to the city after 691.
So I want to get into a little bit about, we talked about how 691 changed the park and how that impacted it. And along those lines, there's a lot of things that have disappeared from the park over the years. So a couple people wrote in after you talked about the mortar, the cannon. What happened to the cannon?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so in 1944, Meriden was considered the ideal war community. And the mayor at the time, Francis Danaher, he was caught in a weird situation where here his city was considered the ideal war community, and yet he had asked for metal for their scrap drive, and we don't have any. Well, the idea of, hey, the mortar that's at Hubbard Park, and there was a mortar at City Hall. What if we gave these? Well, it went to the court. It went to the city council, the Court of Common Council, and they're like, "Don't do it! Don't do it! Don't do it!" Well, apparently, he wanted to save face, I guess, and he actually did. He actually sent both of them to be scrapped for the war effort.
So other things that have been lost from the park, actually partially lost, partially still there. Can you talk about the large man-made rock formation in the Hubbard Park woods? I think I've heard it referred to as a beehive. And I know there was also one that was displaced with 691 too, right?
That's right. Again, there's really no definite number. I've talked to a lot of people who remember the park very vividly, and I think there's no exact number that I know of right now. From what I'm seeing, 3 to 4, maybe possibly more. But when 691 came in, because they were sporadic throughout those woods. When 691 came in, it destroyed a couple of them. The one that's still there now. So if you're on your way to the castle, and when you're going to the castle, you're going to come across this beehive. So this beehive actually came from Hubbard's travels over to Europe. In Europe, it's considered a symbol of nature, a symbol of life. And so we still see a little bit today. If you're at the wading pool behind the skate house, at the base of the handrails, you can still see the symbols, the beehive symbols along the bottom. And there was also a beehive that was along Crow Hollow Brook, right as you're going down West Main Street. It was right across the street in the little river alongside of West Main Street.
And can you talk a little bit about how the beehive that's still there today actually operated originally?
Yeah, well, they had a, okay, here, I'll tell you a funny story about Hubbard. Okay, so Hubbard realized with the people going back and forth, trekking up and across the park, he wanted people to have water. He wanted people to be able to have these, go to this natural spring, get the water. And so he had cups. Unfortunately, and I have a very good friend who actually found a picture of these cups, and I put it in the book. Seth, I know you're out there somewhere. You know what? Thank you again for these pictures. You're the man. But he found these pictures. He found a picture of this one random guy holding a cup. Now, it was only a month span that these cups actually existed. Hubbard started finding these cups around the park, and he put a quick stop to it. You know what? If you need to have this drink, just put your mouth right up to it and gobble up. But the funny thing is that a very, very brief time period from like May to July, some really, 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 really small amount of time, he had these cups. And just like I said, lo and behold, Seth found that picture for me. I was very grateful to him.
So also talking a little bit more about things that have disappeared from Hubbard Park over time, can you talk a little bit about the Hubbard Park Zoo and what happened to all the animals in the end?
Yeah, it's sad. So where the stone the caretaker's house today is, across from that was where the zoo once stood. It started in 1956. It lasted about 25 years. Unfortunately, to the animals, it unfortunately just very sad. People started abusing the animals, and it was they made the decision to just let it fall down. I mean, just let it. They had to get rid of it.
And kind of on the lines of animals, could you talk a little bit about, I find it fascinating, the dovecote and the squirrel area that was down by the waterfall today?
Yeah. How do you know about that?
Yeah, just did a little reading of a book a couple of weeks ago.
All right. So when Hubbard went on that trip around the world, he took a lot of aspects, a lot of traditions, a lot of ideas from other countries. Scotland, obviously, the Tower, classical architecture. I mean, could he have been in Rome? Could he have been in Italy? Could he have been somewhere else? Possibly. I'm not quite sure with that one. But if you notice, the Grecian temple has a classical design, a classical architecture. In the case of the dovecote, so dovecote is basically a gazebo for birds, and there was a dovecote. So if you're on Notch Road is the road that's in front of the band, facing the bandshell. Right before you get to the children's playground, where it used to be, the wading pool, there was this big gazebo, and it went up in 1898, and it was gone by, I'm thinking, probably between 1910 and 1915, 1920 the latest. And it housed pigeons. It housed a bunch of different types of thoroughbred birds.
I just think that's fascinating that they had this little gazebo where, it's gone from the landscape today. It's a little known fact.
Yeah, well, if you remember that book that you read, there was also a squirrel cage. So on the opposite side where the Connertons had their property, there was a big squirrel cage. And so it's kind of funny. I mean, they had animals everywhere. And then the sheep. Then the sheep were kept by Heel's place. Remember, you read the book. I have to talk about Heel now. Hold on. So on the way to the reservoir, there was a guy. His name was George Heel. Now, George Heel was cool because George Heel was the original watchman of the reservoir. So, and he lived. So if you're going to the reservoir, opposite the reservoir, there's about 5 or 6 stairs that go up. And that's where Heel lived. And George Heel, the house was gone by he died in 1900. The house was gone by 1905. They tore that down. But that is where evidence seems to point to where the sheep that used to manicure the lawn to Hubbard Park, that's where they stayed. So you got the sheep up there. You got the squirrels down across from the band shell, and then you had the pigeons that were right next to the wading pool. Why are you making that face?
I knew you'd jump to Heel at some point.
Oh, I love that guy. It's funny, if we stop. Okay, so listen to this. So you devote all this time to something. Come on, you with the Wilcox stuff, this. You devote so much time into something. You devote so much time that you start, do I dare say favorites? I mean, I guess you do. There's this one gentleman, George Heel. I really feel, this is weird. I feel close to this guy. I don't know. He's dead for 100 and something years, but his story is pretty cool. He was the overseer to the park, or to the reservoir. All right.
I can definitely relate to that.
Can you tell I'm loosening up now? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Bring it on.
Before we move on, I do want to say, so that everybody knows, this book that I'm mentioning that I read through was a proof copy of Justin's Hubbard Park book. And as you heard a few times tonight, that book will be released in February of 2021. So put that on your calendar and make sure to pick up your first edition copy when that comes out in just a few months. Had to do a little plug.
Hey, that's cool. That's cool.
So
can I also, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, with all the research, the last 3 years of research with this, I was really standing on the shoulders of giants. Going back to what I was saying to you before about the superintendents and, the people close to the park, I'm getting it secondhand. I mean, we all have a story to tell about this park. That's true. But when you take someone like Mr. Barry, Mr. Zabora, Mr. Borden, these guys live, eat, and breathe this park. I mean, if I talk to Mr. Borden, Chris Borden, the current Parks and Recreation Director, I mean, this guy can tell you where every pipeline underneath the entire park is. I mean, I'm doing it from a research part, but these guys live it. So when I was researching all this stuff, I mean, those guys are the real heroes of that park. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I mean, Chris, Mark, I mean, the whole legacy of the park directors and the superintendents, those guys are they're the gems of the park. To keep it the way it is, intact the way Hubbard intended it. I mean, at any given time over the 120 years, somebody could have misstepped somewhere along the line, and it could have been damaging, but it's these guys that really kept it going.
Yeah, and to echo your points, I mean, I think that was one thing I took away from reading your book was, how instrumental that department and the heads of parks and recreation, or the heads of parks and the heads of recreation on their own have been to keeping that park and making really what it is today. Absolutely.
Like I said, every one of them, I actually just told Mr. Chris Borden the other day, I told Chris, when a parks superintendent was appointed, or the Parks and Rec director, they came at the right time. I mean, there was a gentleman named Craig Schroeder who came in at the right time, and he really took the park when it was in its most dire straits in the 70s, and he just whipped it into shape. When Mark Zabora came around, we needed people there, and here he is with the Daffodil Festival, the Festival of Silver Lights, the Christmas in the Park. I mean, Mark really brought it to levels that that we never even saw in that park. I mean, Chris is carrying on as well. Barry, brought the daffodils in. I mean, all of these people brought exactly what they need. They brought to the park exactly what it needed at that time.
Well, and you just presented the perfect segue to our next question, which is, how did all the daffodils end up at Hubbard Park? Can you talk about the origin?
What a great question. What a great question. You know what? I have it recorded. To hear Mr. Barry actually tell me that, Mr. Barry, God rest his soul, so when I got in contact with, so I'm talking about Mr. Barry, the superintendent's son. So about a year and a half ago, I was introduced to him, and he lived down by the water, or down by the coast. And he said, Justin, come on down. And here's a funny story. So on my way to his house, I thought, hey, great. Let me get some donuts. Let me get some coffee. He let me into his house. We sat there. Now, mind you, 90 years old. He's right there. We never touched the coffee. For me not to touch coffee, no. It was a good conversation. For me not to touch a donut or a coffee, it's got to be a really good conversation. As you know. But anyway, we just talked for 3 hours, and I shouldn't say it. He talked for 3 hours, and I just sat there, jaw to the ground, just listening to everything this guy had to say, everything he had to say. So when he was telling me the true to life story about the daffodils, I was just taken aback. So here's I make a long story longer, obviously. So in the late 40s, right after World War II, how can I say this? Holland was still occupied by a lot of the Germans. And unfortunately, one of their major crops, agriculture. And unfortunately, with the Germans still there, the Germans were actually taking most of the food. So obviously their nutrition was compromised. So one of their major exports was tulips. And so they tried eating the tulips. Well, actually they survived on tulips. The other one they tried was daffodils. They got sick. They gave the daffodils to the dogs and to the animals. They got sick. So, hey, we got to get rid of these somehow. So they send people over to America. And one day, knock on the door, Mr. Barry answers the door, and one of his guys say, hey, we got these daffodils, would you like to buy some? Yeah, sure, I'll buy some. So he got some, and he just kind of threw them off into the woods. Well, when they sprouted, next thing you know, what a beautiful thing. So let's order some more. So it was kind of like a by chance situation more than a aesthetic, I guess, point of view. And
can you talk a little bit about the history of the Daffodil Festival and how that came to be?
Oh, yeah. So it was a request between Fred Mandeville, who was the director of Parks and Recreation. It was Carter White from the Record Journal, and it was brought to their attention, hey, we had a Daffodil Day back in the 50s. All right. There was a Daffodil Day, and it was it only happened for a couple of years. But they wanted to bring that back. And hey, there was about 9 people that were in a room. They came back, and Mark Zabor is actually he was my go-to for this, because he was in that room when it happened. And I got some really cool pictures of that too, as a matter of fact, of that room, and people in that room. And then it was actually kind of a little get together. It wasn't even a festival like we know today. But you also remember we had a Meriden Expo, and the Meriden Expo was kind of like bursting at the seams. So they needed something new. They needed something bigger. I don't remember the expo that well. I went there once. I still have a Journey t-shirt. I still have that from the Meriden Expo. I was 3 years old. So I'm dating myself there, but I was 3 years old. I wonder where this shirt is. Anyways, but any which way, that's how it started.
All right, so we've got tons of questions coming in. I know we won't be able to get to all of them.
Bring it on, I'm ready.
Can you talk about the dinosaur footprints that are in a couple places throughout the park, how they got there and if they're real.
Yeah, they are real. They are real. So there's a couple different sets of footprints. So there was a poultry dealer. All right, ready for this one? So there was a poultry dealer in the late 40s who witnessed that they were doing some construction on Yale Avenue, and he happened to be there, and he actually called up the city and said, "Hey, what is this?" When they were digging up at Yale Avenue, and they called in Superintendent Barry. He came in and says, "We need this transferred over to the park." And so the big large set, the big full, I think it's I forget the dimensions. You know what? I know a lot, but I forgot the dimensions of those. It actually that full set came from Yale Avenue. There are others that were found within the park. In fact, Mr. Zabora told me a really cool story once where he was driving home one day and he saw all these cars parked on the side of the road. You know, he goes, didn't pay it any mind. Well, I guess he was leaving work the next day and he saw these cars parked on the side of the road. Well, lo and behold, he had to stop. You know, he's the director. He stops. He goes up to him and says, "Hey, what's going on?" And they said they're looking for fossils. So the fact that there are fossils in the park still, pretty amazing.
So can you talk a little bit about Face Rock? I know you talked about in the video.
Yeah.
Just folks are wondering, where is that located in the park?
Oh, that's a secret. Oh, I can't say it's a secret. Is it a secret? No, it's not a secret. So Walter Hubbard lost his wife very early on, as I had said in the video, and he loved kids. Unfortunately, his own. But what he did do when Hubbard's brother died, he took in his niece, and she kind of became his adopted daughter. And so you can see his love for children right off the bat. He wanted to have something that the kids can enjoy. He wanted to have something that would be cute, whimsical. And so he had Quigley, his right-hand man, when they were putting in one of the culverts, one of the bridges alongside of Parkway at the time. Again, the main entrance, you're coming up the right-hand side. Before you get to the caretaker's house, it's going to be right there on the right-hand side. And basically it's just check this out. You know what? I got it right next to me. You want to see something cool? Watch this. It looks like this. So I went in my backyard. Don't tell my wife this one. Oh, she had to make her way into this somehow, right? So I went into her garden. She's going to see this. I'm done. I am done. Forget it. Cut. But anyways, so I went into her garden, right? My wife has this really nice ornate garden in the back. Well, she doesn't know this, but I took one of the rocks from back there. And I wanted to make my own face rock. So if you can kind of see, it's kind of, I don't know, can you see? So it looks kind of like it. But originally it had, oh, Brian, come on. Originally it had two marbles. Today it's there and it's got a funky smile and everything, but it's one of Hubbard's, I guess, whimsical accents to the park.
That is spot on. Marbles are on the right spot and everything. That's impressive.
Oh, you should have seen the mess when I was drilling those holes in. You should have seen the mess I was making in our basement. Oh man, it was a mess, but hey, c'est la vie.
Can you talk a little bit about the legend of the Leatherman and whether or not he allegedly had a shelter in the land that is now Hubbard Park?
Yeah, so the Leatherman, the Leatherman was a gentleman who, I don't know his backstory, but I do know that he made the trip. It was a 5-week cycle that he would do from Canada through Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and then throughout New York. He had a very, very, I'm assuming, disruptive childhood, where he ended up doing this trek. And it was almost like clockwork where he would actually come to Meriden throughout this cycle. Now, if you go up to West Peak, you go where the radio towers are. From what I understand, if you go down the main trail that kind of hugs the rim, the top of West Peak. And then you just skirt down. It's along the base of the Southington, down by Slopers. If you go down there, the rock formation is still there. Now, the Meriden Historical Society has a really, really cool lean-to picture taken back in the 1890s. Now, he died, I think, in the 1880s, but the lean-to was still, the picture is still there in this picture. And it's a really, really cool picture.
So I mean, the legend of the old Leatherman is something that remains in our local lore. And so kind of along those lines, someone asked if you can tell a secret story about Hubbard Park.
Secret. There's a lot of secrets. Sure. Well, let me think. Here's a good story. It's called the Sunken Bell. We'll do the Sunken Bell. So in the 1890s, there was a gentleman named Gerhard Hauptmann, and Gerhard Hauptmann ended up becoming a Nobel Prize winner for literature in 1912. Gerhard, I mean, if you read up on this guy, you'll see that he didn't have the greatest marriage. So he ended up having a disagreement with his wife, and he was living in Germany, I believe at the time, Austria, somewhere out that way in Eastern Europe. And he ended up coming to Meriden. He knew a doctor here in town. And so he ended up meeting up with this doctor. And the doctor said, what can we do? He's like, I just need some time alone. And so he ended up coming to Hubbard Park. This is before it was Hubbard Park. And he used to sit on the side of the reservoir. And as you know, there's an island in the middle of the reservoir, and he used to watch this island and really just, it was a place of inspiration for him. And unfortunately, he devised this kind of like a fairy tale, this island, and it's called the Sunken Bell. Now he's known for his plays. He's known for his literature, but this one particular piece is quite graphic and, like I said, very scary a little bit. So, but it was based on his time in the sitting along the reservoir, and I think it was released in 1898. I could double check that, but I think just before the turn of the century. But that's kind of a cool story. Very, very famous play based on Hubbard Park.
And didn't he go on to win Nobel Prize or something?
1912.
All right, so as we get into our last few questions, I'm going to pull back a little bit and more reflective kinds of questions. As you look back on 120 years of Hubbard Park and of Castle Craig, what would you say is the single greatest turning point in the park's history?
Oh, geez. Turning point in terms of positive, negative, or just turning point?
Either one, I guess, just a turning point.
Why you get me good? That's a good question. That's a good question. I'm going to say three of them. All right. I'm going to say three turning points that really, aside from the dedication. All right. So the death of Donald Robinson would be one of them, and I'll explain that in a second. 691, without question, was a huge turning point. And Daffodil Festival, when Mr. Zaborda started that up, it turned from a local. It put the focus on, the park. Instead of being local, it became regional quite quickly. I mean, but going back, so Donald Robinson was a park superintendent in the early 40s. Unfortunately, Don Robinson was called into war. He ended up becoming a major in the war. He got called into duty, and I know all this because Mr. Barry was very, very, very close to him. So when Don Robinson got called into war, he ended up going to the South Pacific, and he was killed there. That was a very, very, very big turning point for the park, because now Barry assumed the superintendent role. And with Barry, the flowers, with Barry, eventually the band shell, we really see a huge renaissance in the park with Barry. But going back to Donald Robinson, there's a very beautiful monument in the park. Now, if you're coming up West Main Street, before you take the right, so the third street going up past Wise Guys, and then you get to the main entrance today. Just before you get to the main entrance, there's a rock right on the side of the road. And if you go there, you can see the plaque, you know, in memory of Don Robinson. I think that was a major turning point because that brought Barry right up the ranks real fast. As far as 691, we already talked about. I think when that letter went into the newspaper, the rape of Hubbard Park, I think that was like the nail that sealed the coffin there. I mean, it was just like, you know, boom, you know, the public was really behind keeping that park intact, and it fell apart. And then obviously, like I said, Daffodil Festival.
So I know this is also another really big question, but I'm sure there's one or two that you could answer this with. Are there still unanswered questions related to the park?
Yeah. Oh, if you remember in that video, you remember that flag that flew over the castle, that dedication, during the dedication, that flag, so it was shot down in the war. It made its way to Honolulu. Huh? How does it go from Civil War to Honolulu? Okay. Then somehow, all right, it's in Honolulu. How in the world does it come back? How does it come here? So Civil War, Honolulu, and now it's in the possession of Meriden. Walter Hubbard gets it. How? That's a question that I would love to get answered. So if you know that answer, let me know. I don't know. Honolulu. What? A big one.
All right. Well, and our last question for the night.
Let's make it a good one. Okay,
it is a good one. Well, I think it's a good one. So
okay.
If there's only one thing, whether it's a fact, a piece of information, the truth behind a myth, a lesson, something like that, that attendees tonight remember after the program, what would you want that to be?
Wow, man, you got good questions. Who's writing your questions? Are you writing? That was a good one.
Thank you.
I'd have to say, in 120 years, that the park still remains true to Hubbard's vision. You know, I mean, like I had said earlier, you know, it's definitely not the park that he saw and witnessed when he was alive, but I think all of his ideals, his wishes, his design, it's still there. And again, going back to the superintendents and the directors, you know, they've made it that way. You know, I really, you know, kudos to all those in the whole legacy, the whole line of those supervisors really have kept it true to what Walter Hubbard wanted back then. In fact, here's a good one, because when Mr. Barry wanted that bandshell built, I mean, he was very strict in the fact that he wanted in a rustic in a very rustic theme. All right, to pretty much place it thematically in that park. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. It's still true to what it was 120 years ago.
And I think that's the perfect place to leave the conversation. Justin, do you have any closing remarks or thoughts or anything you'd like to share with everybody tonight?
Just a big thank you. You know, I think a thank you to a lot of people, but definitely the aforementioned, you know, thank you very much to Alan and Netta Weathers. They have helped me tremendously with so much. Obviously the Barry family, Mark Zabora, Chris Borden. I also want to shout out to my principal, John Kuckel. You're out there somewhere, man. Thank you so much for just listening to my stories and hear me ramble about the park. And one last one. Ever since about a year ago when I started doing all the posts on Facebook, I cannot say thank you enough to all the people who have come, the messages that have come, Anybody that really just stood by my side helping me get through this. I cannot say thank you enough, because I know we don't really know each other. I never met these people face to face, but you know, there's names that I see all the time on these posts. I can't say enough thank yous to you, because you've really helped me through this tremendously. I can't say that enough.
Well, Mary says, keep the Facebook posts coming.
All right, Mary, woo!
Well, thank you, Justin, again, for being with us tonight and for sharing your history and your knowledge.
I hope I did okay. Did I do okay? All
You did an
right,
awesome job.
it's all good.
Awesome.
Knocking at my coffee. I need a coffee.
Well, a big thanks to Justin for sharing his information with us. It was really great to have him here for our first ever Meriden Historical Society virtual presentation. So remember to keep an eye out for Hubbard Park by Arcadia Press. That's coming out in February. I'd also like to echo some of Justin's thanks and extend a thank you to the Department of Parks and Recreation, Chris Borden and Kathy Matula, as well as David Cooley, for helping to make tonight's presentation possible. One thing. So if you would like to learn more about all of our work, I hope you will find our organizations online, on our websites, or on social media. For more about Parks and Recreation, you can follow the department on both Facebook and on Instagram. And if you have not explored it yet, Discover Meriden is a new community website with information about arts, culture, community, and business events happening right here in Meriden. And of course, to learn more about the Meriden Historical Society, visit meridenhistoricalsociety.org, and remember to like us on Facebook. We have more virtual programs on the horizon, including next month when I will be talking about the now demolished Jedediah Wilcox Mansion that stood at 816 Broad Street. If you are so inclined, you can donate to the Society on our website, and you can even purchase an annual membership, both via PayPal. Community support and memberships are what enable us to fulfill our mission of preserving Meriden's past for future generations. I hope you'll consider making a donation if you enjoyed tonight's program. If you would like to rewatch tonight's presentation or share it with a friend, recordings will be available on Facebook and on YouTube in the coming weeks. And with that, I would like to thank all of you for joining us. We hope to see you again for another Meriden Historical Society virtual program. Have a great night and be well.